Okay. Um, so good evening, all. We haven't had a session of Jews in the News in a few weeks, and tonight I wanted to talk about the deal that Israel made with Hamas to arrange a ceasefire and to begin the release of hostages. And I'm going to share my screen a couple of times, and I hope this works. My computer is running slow, and I'm not sure why that is. Um, but well, hopefully this will work. I want to start with, oh boy, okay. So this is the Times of Israel. Um, and I don't like sharing a screen from the Times of Israel directly because of all these ads on the page, but I just want to share this minute and a half video. These are the three women who were released yesterday, meeting their and the IDF women soldiers, taking them to meet their mothers, um, who they, of course, haven't seen in since October 7th. And I'm not sure what's going on with my computer. Why won't it let me do this? There we go. Will you play, please? Oh, there we go. Where's my Where's my mother? She said. Each one of them meets their mother and then goes on FaceTime and talks to the rest of the family. Dad, I came home alive. See the wherewithal to say thank you to the soldier taking care of you. Mother is saying, I'm here, I'm here. So I wanted to start with that because that's what this deal is all about. And I just wanted to talk a little bit. I'm going to share screens of other articles that talk about the details of the plan and things like that. I've talked before since October 7th, 472 days ago, that about the mitzvah of Pidyon Shivuyim, the redemption of captives. And tragically, this is a mitzvah that that Jews have been involved in fulfilling throughout Jewish history. One could argue that when Joseph's brothers threw him into the pit, and then the family came down years later and reunited with Joseph, that's not necessarily redemption of a captive, but it's a reunion of a family. We are throughout Jewish history, especially in Europe. In modern times, the Jews of Ethiopia, the Jews of Yemen, the Jews of Iraq. This is Jews of Arab countries right after 1948. The Soviet Jews, the whole movement in the 60s and 70s to release to get Russia to the Soviet Union to release the Jewish refuseniks and any Jew who wanted to leave Russia. All of these are instances of Pidyon Shvuyim. There were we have in Jewish historical sources Jews who have been taken captive and held ransom intentionally by the government that took them captive because the government wanted more money from the Jewish community. And famously, one rabbi, Rabbi Meir of Rothenburg in the 1300s, told his community not to ransom him. And he languished in prison for a number of years until finally he was released. So there are many, many examples of Pidyon Shvuyim. Israel has been involved in Pidyon Shvuyim famously with Gilad Shalit, the Israeli soldier held captive in Gaza for a number of years until the Israeli government, Prime Minister Netanyahu, agreed to release him for several hundred, if not 1,000 soldiers, including among those released was Sinwar, who ended up becoming the head of Hamas and orchestrated October 7th. So you could argue, in hindsight, whether the price for the redemption of captives is worth it. And it's one of these moral dilemmas that really don't have a black and white answer. How can you put a price tag on a life and say that this price is too high to save this one life? I don't know. I don't know how one does that. But this is the quandary that is forced upon Israel by the barbaric, evil, terrorist organizations that take Israeli prisoners, Israeli hostages, as a result of terrorist activities. So it's one thing to have a prisoner release or a prisoner exchange, as Russia and Ukraine might do at some point if their war is over. That is a war between two states, and the world acknowledges that Ukraine and Russia are two states. So when two states go to war against each other, prisoners will be taken as just a matter of course of war. And then there are rules of engagement that define and how to treat those prisoners, the soldiers who are prisoners, and what kind of situation to house them, how to feed them, and also could help negotiate release of prisoners. So when it's state against state, there are rules. Some people have commented that those same rules apply in this situation of Hamas against Israel. And that is just one more factor that highlights the world's disregard of Hamas as a terrorist organization and the world's insistence on calling them freedom fighters or the legitimate representatives of the Palestinian people. So nothing is further from the truth, and it is I don't know the appropriate adjective to describe the evil that's involved in equating Hamas with an average state among the states that are members of the United Nations. So you can't do that. And so before I get ahead of myself, I want to talk about the details. The idea of redemption of captives is one of the 613 mitzvot. It is a mitzvah, like I said, that has been tragically fulfilled throughout the centuries. And here's another example of that, this agreement that went into force yesterday. I have no answer to whether Israel is doing the right thing. Should have done this back in May when almost the exact deal was proposed, and Hamas and Israel nixed it. But why now? We'll get into that in a little bit. But the debate will go on in Israeli society as whether this was a good deal or not. But I wanted to start our evening with that a minute and a half video to highlight these are people's lives that we're talking about. I also just want to react to those 3 women hostages that were released, these 3 Israeli women, and the poise, the smiles on their faces. That's like unbelievable to me. I was just talking about it again with my wife at dinner tonight. Perhaps it was their army training that enabled them to have such resilience and such poise in such dire circumstances. I just can't imagine. I just can't imagine an American young woman in their 20s without army training to have been held hostage. And who knows what has been done to them over the past 472 days to come out and like smile for the camera, hug their mother, and want to see their family on FaceTime or WhatsApp, whatever they were doing on their phone, just to be able to do that, and instead of just collapsing and telling the camera to go away. I just don't understand that. It's just remarkable, and it just adds to who these Israelis are, and their strength and resilience through it. And we only pray that the other hostages that will be released will be in as good health. And you may have noticed that one of the women had hand bandaged 2 of her fingers. So it's these 2 fingers right here were shot off by Hamas terrorists when the terrorists came into her home in one of the kibbutzim, and she had gone because the story was that the terrorist had shot her dog, and she went to try to help the dog, and the terrorist shot again, and her fingers were shot off. The stories that will come out about these sausages and what they endured, just unimaginable horrors. So I want to try to share my screen again to an article. Oops, I have to do something first before I can do that. Yeah. Okay. Let's see if I can do it now. This is from the Brookings Institution. There's a note down here what the Brookings Institution is a nonprofit organization based in Washington. Our mission is to conduct in-depth, nonpartisan research to improve policy and governance at local, national, and global levels. I just wanted to say that because I usually don't share things from the Brookings Institution. It doesn't come up in my Google searches often, but this article about the Gaza ceasefire, what the Israel-Hamas agreement means, is written by two researchers who are part of the Middle East section of the Brookings Institute. So this person, Natan Sachs, says this is a two-stage deal, which allows both sides to claim they have stuck to their core demands. Israeli officials claim that this is not an agreement to end the war, while Hamas is still standing in Gaza. Instead, they insist that in the second phase, the remaining Hamas leadership will be exiled and excluded from governing the Gaza Strip. So this is a 6-week first phase, during which Israel and Hamas is supposed to negotiate the second phase. So Israel insists, let's just keep, if Hamas refuses, as one would expect, the ceasefire would collapse. For Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, this is politically important. He can sell the first phase to his far-right partners, but not the proposed second phase. Well, he sold it to most of his partners. One partner with 6 seats in the Knesset left the government. So now Netanyahu has a government of 62 seats, won over the majority of 61 out of 120 seat Knesset. So now his government is hanging on by a thread. And so that one party, Ben Gvir's party, left because they didn't think a deal should have been struck at all. The others stayed in because of this statement here, supposedly, that Netanyahu can claim, the next phase means Hamas leaves. Well, if you saw the videos of the hostages being released yesterday, Hamas hasn't gone anywhere, and I think Hamas absolutely wanted the world to see that they're still there. If you saw that horrific exchange where they're released from a Hamas vehicle into the Red Cross vehicle, they just have to go, 10 feet from one to the other, but in those 10 feet, all the Hamas terrorists are dressed in the green masks with the Hamas logo and the headgear and weapons, saying clearly, we're still here. You may have seen also, I'm trying to stay on track, but you may have seen also, and I'll share my screen in a moment about that. Hamas gave them gift bags, and I'll just keep that in mind. We'll get to the gift bags momentarily. Hamas, however, understands this calculation. That is, that Netanyahu might bolt, and there might not be a second phase, which is why it has so far rejected deals that did not end the war completely, with Hamas still on its feet and able to resume its dominant position in Gaza. Threading that needle has required outside assurances, though not ironclad, that a second phase will be negotiated once the first phase is underway. So, which is also why all 100 hostages are not being released right away. In the first 42 days of the ceasefire, Hamas would release 33 Israeli hostages, women, the elderly, those categorized as severe humanitarian cases, and 2 very young children of the Bibas family, though there's significant fear that they might not be alive. Israel would release hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in return, including more than 200 sentenced to life in prison for murder in the context of terrorism. The precise ratio will depend on the identities of those released. So it turns out maybe 20, 25 years ago, there were a pair of rabbinical students from my rabbinical school, the Jewish Theological Seminary, who were in Israel for their year of study. They were on a bus together that was attacked by a terrorist, and they were killed on the bus. So these 2 students, there's one of the study halls at the seminary is named after them. Turns out that the terrorist involved in blowing up that bus was released yesterday as part of this deal. It was posted on Facebook by classmates who are rabbis now of those 2 rabbinical students. Also, in the first phase, Israel would begin withdrawing from what it calls the Netzarim corridor, which bifurcates the Gaza Strip. The Israelis had intended that this string of military positions would allow them to control who could return to northern Gaza and to prevent those Hamas operatives from returning to northern Gaza, where they've been conducting extensive and devastating operations in recent weeks. In the first phase, Israel would not fully withdraw from Gaza. It would maintain a security buffer zone within Gaza along its perimeter, buffering between it and the Israeli villages attacked on October 7th. 16 days after the beginning of the deal, the second phase negotiations are supposed to start. In the second phase, the remaining male Israeli hostages and captured soldiers would be released. Israel would also start to redeploy in Gaza's border with Egypt, which is known in Israel as the Philadelphia Corridor. It would leave the Rafah crossing with the evacuation completed, in theory, in the second stage of the agreement. This is notable as Netanyahu has previously called this presence strategically essential for Israeli security. If you want to learn more about the exact details, also about when the hostages, these 33 hostages, are released over the course of the next 6 weeks. Like, I think the next group is going to be released on Shabbat, this coming Shabbat. And then for each person released, there's a certain number of Palestinian prisoners who are released also. So it's very, very difficult. And when we saw what Hamas was doing, you can imagine what Israel is going through in knowing that they have to deal with these animals in getting these their citizens returned. So you know the price, the redemption price is not just about Israel's security and what price is too high to threaten Israel's security, but it also is a threat to morality. Like, in other words, how low are we willing to go to dirty ourselves with the barbarism and immorality and evil of Hamas in order to do business with them, in order to release the hostages, right? And the fact that we have to see these disgusting images, it also affects us, and that's part of the price. That's part of the price that we, as the Jewish community around the world, not just the state of Israel, has to pay in order to bring these people home. So I wanted to share my screen again with this these so-called gift bags, just to highlight the evil. Hamas forces parting gift bags on freed hostages as mementos of hellish captivity. So here you see the Hamas logo here with the gun on this paper bag that's being presented to one of the hostages. The three Israeli women freed Sunday were sent home by Hamas with gift bags and Palestine lanyards in a choreographed handover seemingly designed by the terror group for propaganda purposes. Inside the bags given to Emily, Romy, and Doron were pictures of them in captivity. Can you imagine this? And certificates, according to reports in Hebrew language media. Damari, Gonen, and Steinbrecher were reunited with their families. Okay. In videos released by the Israeli Defense Forces and Hamas itself, the three are seen being given paper bags decorated with the logo of the Iz ad-Din al-Qassam Brigades, Hamas's armed wing. Other photos and videos show Damari posing as a masked man holds a folder with papers in Hebrew and Arabic containing personal information about her, including her hometown, her Israeli ID number, and where she was arrested, presumably referring to Damari's abduction from her home in Kibbutz Kfar Aza. The paper is signed by Al-Qassam Brigade's command. The three are also seen in propaganda video released by Hamas following the handoff, holding up the gilded folder, which has the Al-Qassam logo on the outside and text reading Al-Aqsa Flood Deal, Al-Qassam Brigades, along with the year. In the footage, you see this picture here with these bags. Um, in the video released by IDF, the three can still seen holding the bags after the Red Cross transferred them to Israeli hands. Hebrew media reports indicated that the bags also contained pictures of the hostages in captivity, but those could not be seen in any of the images. The bags, lanyards, and documents all appeared to be part of a media campaign by Hamas aimed at lending the terror group's abduction of civilians a veneer of legitimacy in line with propaganda efforts during previous hostage releases. Okay, so just for Hamas to try to show the world that Hamas is like any other state, and this is a prisoner exchange. And so they get a bag with these mementos to kind of prove to the world that they were that these Israelis were prisoners and not hostages. So just to add to the evil that is Hamas and what Israel had to deal with. And so, yeah, just one second. Yeah, one more thing I'm going to share in a moment. Okay. 33 hostages released over the course of the next 6 weeks. Close to 2,000 Palestinian prisoners to be released as well. And then who knows what will happen after that and whether there will be any deal. Now, an element of this which I hesitate to get into is a critique of Prime Minister Netanyahu himself as to why the deal was made now as opposed to back in May. Is the situation with Hamas any different, significantly different today than it was back in May? I'm not an expert. I'm not a military expert. I'm not a political expert. But certainly Sinwar was assassinated since then. Hezbollah, the war with Hezbollah happened since May. And the Nasrallah was assassinated by Israel since then. So it's possible, the argument could be, that Netanyahu needed to keep on fighting to ensure that Israel could do as much in its power as it could to reduce Hamas's influence. I don't know, but that's a way of suggesting that perhaps Netanyahu had his reasons to wait from May until now to reach this agreement. The other thing, of course, is the new president who took the oath of office today, and perhaps he had something to do with this as well. And perhaps there's an assurance that Netanyahu feels that he could trust Trump and his administration more than he could trust Biden and Biden's administration. So again, I don't know, but it's a suggestion. But so here, the last thing I wanted to share about this is this article from the New York Times called "The Sheikh, the Mogul, and the Diplomat, the Trio Who Sealed the Gaza Truce." The Qatari Prime Minister, working with both President Biden's envoy and President-elect Donald Trump's representative, formed an unlikely partnership. So this is interesting. This was published on the 17th, just a few days ago. At his seaside office complex in Doha on Wednesday evening, the Qatari Prime Minister thought he had a deal. Hamas negotiators, led by a burly former lawmaker, had left the Prime Minister's office, having given up on an 11th hour demand that was the last major obstacle to a ceasefire in Gaza. Reporters had begun to assemble in an auditorium downstairs, expecting to witness the Prime Minister announce that he and other mediators had finally brokered a deal. Two American envoys joined Sheikh Mohammed as he prepared his statement. Suddenly, there was a new problem, according to two people familiar with the negotiations. In a room elsewhere on the sixth floor, the Israeli delegation, led by the heads of Israel's two main intelligence agencies, had their own last-minute demand. Prime Minister Netanyahu wanted to clarify the names of a handful of Palestinian prisoners whom Israel would release during the truce. As his aides tried to resolve the final hitch, Sheikh Mohammed sat in his office with Brett McGurk, President Biden's lead negotiator, and Steve Witkoff, the representative of President Trump, President-elect Trump at the time, hoping that their efforts had not been wasted. This account of the final days of negotiation is based on conversations with 9 people involved in or briefed on the talks, some of whom spoke on condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive diplomacy. The truce that was ultimately announced at the belated news briefing, hours after Israel's new demand, was little different to versions promoted for most of the past year by mediators from Egypt, Qatar, and the Biden administration, whose representatives met frequently with the warring parties in Cairo, Doha, and several European capitals throughout 2024. What pushed the deal over the line this past week was the unlikely partnership between the envoys of America's current and future presidents, working in tandem with the Qatari Prime Minister in marathon late-night meetings. While Biden and Trump have competed for credit, the reality is that their representatives were both crucial to the final push, each using different approaches to push the Israeli leadership toward a deal, while Sheikh Mohammed focused on Hamas. Starting last Sunday, the Israeli and Palestinian delegations, as well as the 2 Americans, spent long days at the Prime Minister's compound close to the Old Market in downtown Doha. The delegations, which do not speak directly to each other, sat in different rooms on different floors, with Qatari and Egyptian officials passing messages between the two sides. They aren't natural partners, but the combination of these 3 individuals and the 3 worlds they represent was the only thing that was going to get this done, said Thomas Nides, a former U.S. ambassador to Israel. You needed pressure from all sides, pressure from the Arab world, pressure from Biden, and pressure from Trump. An array of officials and interlocutors had helped push negotiations forward for more than a year. On the American side, McGurk had helped oversee U.S. mediation efforts since the opening weeks of the war, alongside other key players, including the head of the CIA. But in the final days, it came down to the triumvirate. It was McGurk, a veteran diplomat, long focused on the Middle East, who helped craft the deal's complicated details nearly a year ago. It was Witkoff, a real estate investor who plays golf with Trump, who was instrumental in persuading Israel to finally agree to the deal's contents. Now, we can comment whatever we want about the credentials of Witkoff here, and whether it's appropriate to have a real estate investor involved in such intricate and important, significant negotiations, as opposed to a veteran diplomat. So we can think whatever we want about it, but it worked. And it was Sheikh Mohammed who persuaded Hamas to make key compromises while providing both sides with the office space in which to wrangle the final details. The deal they sealed provides for a pause of at least 6 weeks in the fighting, during which time Hamas has agreed. Okay, so this is the deal. The deal is extremely similar. As a result, the critics' momentum returned after Trump's re-election in November, even before the president-elect warned Hamas that there would be all hell to pay if hostages were not released by his inauguration. He appointed Witkoff, who had no diplomatic experience but growing business relationships in Qatar, as his emissary in the Middle East. Witkoff had been playing golf with Trump in September during what law enforcement officials said was an attempt on the former and future president's life. Quietly, members of the Biden administration reached out to Witkoff to see if they could work together on the ceasefire talks, according to 2 people familiar with the conversations. Despite vast political chasms between their bosses, McGurk and Witkoff began to coordinate, sometimes talking several times a day, according to one of the people. Still, wide gaps between Hamas and Israel remained. Shortly before Christmas, with just weeks left in the Biden presidency, McGurk returned despondently from a trip to Doha. He told the Qataris he would not fly back unless Hamas made a clear signal of its interest in a deal. That moment came in the first days of January. Sheikh Mohammed persuaded Hamas to confirm the names, etc., etc. So incredible that it's rare that two administrations, outgoing, incoming, work together on anything besides the transition of the presidency, but on such intricate, secret negotiations, really remarkable. Just getting to the point of how important Pidyon Shvuyim, redemption of captives, is, and that despite whatever we might think of the incoming Trump administration, pro or con, the fact that the Middle East envoy, whether he has a diplomatic history or not, doesn't matter. The fact that he was willing to talk with Biden's person and make this happen is really, really quite remarkable. So, so we will see. I continue to wear my necklace, or bring the hostages home, and until all the hostages are released, I will be wearing that. And there's still every Sunday down in D.C. There's still a rally that takes place for the hostages, and so we need to continue to keep up pressure to ensure that all the hostages are brought home. So, any thoughts, questions, or comments? Feel free to unmute if you have a question or a comment to share.
I'm assuming they gave a list of names of the people, right?
So that
The
was the sticking point.
hostages.
That was a sticking point until that was almost an 11th hour breaking of the
But
deal.
who's to say they're still going to be alive by the time that?
We don't know. We don't know. We don't know. So
Mm.
that's a problem. And so the problem with one of the problems with the deal is the power that Hamas has over the psychology of Israel right now, and that this is their last way of exhibiting their evil and their evil ways over Israel, and that Israel can. We have these images of what Gaza looks like now. It's terrible, and you can't help but feel terrible for the Gazan civilians who are without homes. But so you think on one way, look at the power Israel has to devastate Hamas. Look at the power Israel has to assassinate Sinwar and to kill many Hamas terrorists. But Hamas says, look at our power. We still are in uniform. We still have weapons, and we're still going to show you who we are. And the giving of the gift bags, the wearing of the uniforms, the psychological drama that they play so that Israel doesn't know exactly who's being released when is just further torture that Hamas is bringing about on Israel and the worldwide Jewish community. One other thing I did want to say about this is that, there was the International Red Cross ready to take the hostages from Gaza to Israel. Where has the International Red Cross been since October 7th? And that's something that really, I mean, Israel has been trying, and people who are supportive of Israel, and you would imagine anybody who cares about humanity should have been arguing about where is the International Red Cross? Why haven't they insisted on since October 7th to get in to see the hostages to ensure that they're healthy and that they're being treated well? Nothing, nothing at all from the Red Cross about that, let alone nothing from the United Nations about the atrocities that Hamas committed on women. Okay, atrocities in general, but the rape and abuse of women, there's nothing in the world about that. So there's a lot about this war that has left us reeling psychologically, in a humanitarian way, just to understand, like, you know, it's one thing to know that the world is going to hate Jews. Okay, it's just part of the Jewish condition. We just know that there's anti-Semitism. We know people are going to hate us, or at least the world is not going to like us. But at least maybe the world would have learned a lesson from the Holocaust and admit that we are human beings and that there's a particular way you're supposed to treat human beings, no matter what religion they are, no matter what color their skin. And people should be disgusted and should rise up and protest when human beings are treated in this way. And so what's worse than anti-Semitism, because we've dealt with anti-Semitism for 3,000 years, okay, what's worse is that what's worse is that people don't care what happens to us, our Jewish human beings. And that's a frightening thing to wake up to, when before October 7th, yeah, it's one thing to see the rise of anti-Semitism in America, but at least we were acting under the assumption that Jews who care about social justice have something in common with other people who care about social justice. But what's clear now, after October 7th, is that there are different kinds of social justice. Social justice concerns for Palestinians, yes, but social justice concerns for Jews who are Zionist colonialists, that's quite revealing and actually frightening to understand that it goes beyond anti-Semitism. So this is another way that this is getting played out with the hostage exchange and with what's going to be happening these next 6 weeks. Any other thoughts or comments? Okay, so thank God these hostages, these three women, seem to be in good physical health. We hope that they transition back to their families and they get all the mental health care that they need, as well as their physical health, and that the other hostages come home soon. Have a good night, everybody. Take care.